Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to our Yom Yerushalayim event. Wish everybody a Yom Yerushalayim Sameach, a happy and meaningful day. A day that changed our lives and the lives of the Jewish people immeasurably. Pasuk in Tehillim Kuf Kaf says, Yerushalayim haBenuya she'ir shechubra lo yachdav. Yerushalayim has the power to unite, to come together. Chazal understand this mystically, that Yerushalayim is the point on planet Earth where Yerushalayim shall mala and Yerushalayim shall mata, where the spiritual and physical worlds connect. As Yaakov Avinu said at the beginning of Vayetze, V'zeh sha'ar hashamayim, the uniqueness about Yerushalayim that enables us to connect to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And all our tefillos, all our mitzvahs go through that particular channel. And that was the gift HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave to Klal Yisrael. Interestingly, when Shlomo HaMelech in Malachim Aleph, chapter 8, when he inaugurates the Beis HaMikdash, he makes this wonderful speech. And he davens to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and he says, why have I built this building for you? You don't need a building. HaShamayim v'shmei HaShamayim lo yichal kalucha. HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Ein Sof. You don't need a building, but we need a place where we can connect to you. And my bakasha to you, says Shlomo HaMelech, is that you will always be there, lishmoya el harina ve'el hatfilah, to listen to our tefillah, which we've just done, and our song, which we're about to do in a moment. That the arena and the tefillah should connect us to HaKadosh Baruch Hu through Yerushalayim. And that's the magic formula. And that's something which has been with Am Yisrael since Shlomo HaMelech built the Beis HaMikdash until this very day. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu says to him, Einai v'libi shom kol hayom. And I, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, will focus on this place and hear your tefillahs forever. But the moment that happened 51 years ago, 1967, was not just that the upper and lower worlds were connected, but that Klal Yisrael were reconnected to Yerushalayim. That we who had been banished and thrown out and persecuted away from Yerushalayim for all those millennia were able to come back to Yerushalayim, and the impact of that was immeasurable. The first point of Yom Yerushalayim is to celebrate the Six-Day War. Yeshua's Hashem keheref ayin. Who's ever heard of a war that is conclusively ended in 6 days? Yeshua's Hashem keheref ayin, in the most amazingly short time. The war was conclusively finished after all these Arab nations were so completely certain that this little nation state, which hadn't even celebrated yet its 20th birthday, would be wiped off the map. They were sure. They were totally sure. If you look at the newsreels, everyone should see them. It's part of everybody's education to see the newsreel shots of Nasser with his mass rallies of hundreds of thousands of people all screaming, we are going to wipe them off the map. And all the nations around said, yes, it's that simple, all right, off the map. And in Israel, it was an atmosphere of Avedus. People felt this was going to be the end. And it was the most remarkable moment. 51 years ago, Yom Yerushalayim was genuinely a day of miyogoyim l'simcha. Sometimes when we celebrate Purim, we celebrate Pesach, we sometimes have difficulties connecting maybe to ancient events and feeling they're really part of our lives. Purim was miyogoyim l'simcha. Pesach was me'avdus l'cheirus. But we had in our lives a moment where another Holocaust was about to happen any second. And according to all the logic of military and political powers, that's what was going to happen. And then Yeshua's Hashem keheref ayin, completely and totally, amazingly, HaKadosh Baruch Hu gave Klal Yisrael the inspiration and the strength to succeed against their enemies, and the rest is history. But for us to celebrate that is a privilege. But I want to mention one other aspect of Yom Yerushalayim, more than just the celebration of that Six-Day War. Yeshaya HaNavi, in chapter 2, says famously, Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. That Yerushalayim has an additional power, not just to hear our tefillos, but that it could be the hub, the center of disseminating all the wisdom and ruchnius and kedusha of the Torah throughout the world. What happened? There was an amazing event in Yom Yerushalayim 51 years ago. The Jews living all the way to the east, if you read the memoirs of Sharansky and Yuri Edelstein, they suddenly were awoken. All they knew about being Jewish was that people hated them. They had no idea, they had no thoughts about coming to Israel or rejoining Yahadut. It wasn't on their radar. The seismic ripple effect of Yom Yerushalayim 51 years ago meant that all the way out there, after decades of Soviet repression and atheism, where Judaism had been systematically eradicated from Russian life, suddenly was reawakened. And the whole movement of the refuseniks, which eventually became the great Aliyah of Russian Jewry to Israel, which was a major part of modern Israel, was triggered off by this moment in 1967. Suddenly they were thinking, wait a minute, Am Yisrael Chai. Being Jewish means something to do with the land of Israel, something to do with Shabbat and the Chagim, something to do with the mitzvah. There's something more going on here than just being hated because you're a Jew. And they started to discover it, and that led to the whole refusing movement, which many of us are familiar with. And that was to the east, but all equally to the west. The young men and women on the beach in Los Angeles, totally assimilated and completely distanced and alienated from anything Jewish. Suddenly they thought, wait a minute, Am Yisrael Chai. There's something going on in Yerushalayim, something going on in Israel, and thousands of them came backpacking to Israel. And I met hundreds of them actually, because I came to Yeshiva in Yerushalayim in 1968. I met hundreds of these young men and women, and they came to Israel. And I remember once giving Rav Shlomo Zalman a lift from Shari Chesed to Kol Torah, and he just had a meeting with the leaders of the newly constituted Kiruv movement, Eish HaTorah or Sameach. He said to me, tell me, is it really true that there are thousands of young people coming to Israel, and when you ask them, why have you come here, they say, we don't really know where you're coming. And when we ask them, where are you staying, they say, we don't really know where we're staying. And if you say to them, would you like to come to Yeshiva to hear a shir today and have supper? They come. Is that really true? Are people walking around that you can stop them in the street and say, would you like to hear something about Yahadut? And they say, yes, please. Is that possible? Are there people like that? I remember him asking me that with some amazement. So this was a new phenomenon which had never ever happened before. And this was the ripple effects of Yom Yerushalayim 51 years ago. Rippling out to the west, to Los Angeles, to the east, to Moscow. The whole Jewish world was woken up by these events. And hundreds of thousands of Bnei Yisrael who were completely distant suddenly felt, somehow, they wouldn't formulate it this way, but I will formulate it this way, that Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. There's something about Yerushalayim which has the power to touch the very heart of Am Yisrael and awaken a new interest. And the whole of Jewish life, as we recognize it today, was reactivated at that moment. All the learning and the yeshivas and the communities and everything, which were all pretty verschloffen until that point. This woke everybody up. And that's what we're celebrating. Incidentally, Rav Kook says, with this I'll finish, we've got a few moments this evening. Ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. What's the difference between Tzion and Yerushalayim? Why do we always say Tzion and Yerushalayim? Tzion is in Yerushalayim. Tzion is part of Yerushalayim. So Rav Kook writes that Tzion comes from the word mitzuyan. Tziyonim means something distinctive. Melamed Shehoy Yisrael Mitzuyonim Shom, we say in the Haggadah, that Klal Yisrael in Egypt were distinctive. They wore different clothes, had different names, they were recognizable, they weren't the same as everyone else. That Tzion relates to the uniqueness of Klal Yisrael and the role that Yerushalayim has uniquely for Klal Yisrael. Says the Malbim, it was the seat of the Kohen Gadol, it was the seat of the Sanhedrin. That is Yerushalayim for Klal Yisrael, but that's only half the story. The other half of the story is that Yerushalayim is the spiritual center of mankind. That's a different story completely. And for that you need to see Yeshaya chapter 2, V'haya b'acharis hayamin, his vision that Yerushalayim is going to serve. The Pasuk says, V'holchu amim rabim, v'omru l'chu v'nale ahar Hashem, o beis Elokei Yaakov, v'yareinu midrochov, v'neilcho b'archosov, ki mitzion teitzei Torah udvar Hashem Yerushalayim. And all the nations will come and say, wait a minute, there's a message here, there's a value system, there's something here in Yerushalayim, which we can all benefit from. And Yerushalayim has the potential to transform Klal Yisrael and to transform the world. And the next pasuk is, V'yilmedu goyel goy chayrev. V'yilmedu od milchama. There won't any more hostility between nations. Beating swords into plowshares. Written, I think, somewhat ironically on the walls of the United Nations in New York. Building the swords into plowshares. In modern terms, that means, imagine every nation spent their whole budget, defense budget, on education, health and welfare. The whole defense budget of every nation in the world would be beaten from swords into plowshares and would benefit mankind instead of having a defense budget. Imagine the wealth of the world redirected. That's what Yeshaya wants us to imagine, and that somehow lies potentially in Yerushalayim. And that's Ki Mitzion Teitzei Torah with Var Hashem Yerushalayim, the ability for us to daven better, to walk proud, to feel a sense of strength coming from Yerushalayim. And in addition to which, most of the Rabbonim, Dayanim, teachers that all of us have benefited from, and I include myself in them, are all part of Ki Mitzion Teitzei Torah of Hashem Yerushalayim. I spent 10 years in Yerushalayim learning Torah from great Rabbonim to come back to London. And that Torah being exported around the world through Mechanchim and Mechanches and Rabbonim and the Shiva Bocharim and the Sem girls, that is the way in which Torah radiates out from Yerushalayim, and that was triggered off in our lifetime. 1967, June 67, it was there beforehand, but somehow in June 67 we had a special Siyata D'Shmaya. There was a moment of Achdus. Maybe it wasn't by chance. I've often thought that just 2 days before the Six-Day War was fought, Israel for the first time in its history formed a unity government. Eshkol asked Begin to come and sit in the government. Let's do all this together, he said. This had never happened before. The left and the right had been fighting each other bitterly since the Irgun Haganah hostilities, and the history of Israel had been pretty vicious, the left and the right. Suddenly, it was a new thought. Maybe we should be together, B'Achdus. 2 days before the start of war began. And only because of that was Yerushalayim taken. Because of that unity government, Yerushalayim was captured. And because of that, all the events subsequently were activated. Yeshuas Hashem Keref Ayin. It's the Achdus of Klal Yisrael. It's the power of Klal Yisrael working together around Yerushalayim. And that's why the pasuk, which starts off with Yerushalayim Habenuyo, Ki Yesh Chubur Lo Yachdav, speaking about the power of Yerushalayim, ends Laman Achai V'Reyai Adabra No Sholem. It's got to do with the way in which we connect to each other, where we connect to Eretz Yisrael and other communities and other families, and that is all part of the magic power that Yerushalayim has, both for our tefillas, for our learning. And ultimately we should be zeichet to see the beauty, the completion of the beauty of Yerushalayim, to see the way in which the Nevuah of Yeshaya plays itself out. I wish you all a very happy and meaningful Yom Yerushalayim.
Amen.